All right, folks, welcome to a bit of a different kind of Esoterica episode. And the reason for this episode is I want to talk a bit about this very, very special book. This is a copy of the Crater Hermetis, published originally in 1505. This is an extraordinarily important book in the history of Western esotericism because this is the first book where anyone describes themselves as a Hermeticist. Lodovico Lazzarelli famously translates the complete, as we have them, edition of the Corpus Hermeticum in 1505, and also writes a dialogue, one of the most important dialogues in the history of Western esotericism, in the history of Hermeticism, in which he is engaged in a dialogue with the king, and he is actually describing a reconciliation between Hermeticism and Christianity. And this reconciliation between pagan wisdom and Christian religion is an extraordinarily important event in the history of Western esotericism. And one of the most important ways that it is crucial is that this is the foundational text for what will ultimately become the kind of illuminationist theory that you find in Cornelius Agrippa's three books of occult philosophy. And this is an original copy from 1505. But what's crucially important about this copy is that when I originally obtained it, it was not bound in this extraordinarily beautiful binding. Rather, it was bound in this, basically cardboard. And as you could imagine, and as I think I say a lot on the channel, I'm not a book owner. I'm a book steward. These books come to me from history. I have them for a brief while, and I am a steward of them. I try to hold their wisdom and I try to communicate that wisdom to you guys, but I'm a steward. I'm not a these books. How can you say that you can own something from 1505? I won't live a fraction of this book's life. I'm a steward of this book. And so it became clear to me that when I came to have the book after I obtained it, that this binding was not going to do. And as a steward, part of what you have to do is make a decision about when you inherit a book, what do you do with it? And it was clear to me that this binding, this cover, was not meant to last for history. This was simply not going to protect this book for posterity. And so I made a difficult decision. And the difficult decision is always from the conservationist point of view. It's always better that if you can do nothing, it is always better to do nothing when you inherit an antiquarian book. But in this case, I felt like I had to do something because I did not trust that cover and I did not trust it to posterity. And because I did not trust it, I decided to do something quite significant to this volume, which was to have it rebound, which is to have it rebound and conserved. And to do that, I took to a very important colleague of mine, James Gray, who's a fantastic book dealer and book collector, and he recommended to me Matt Jones to and to rebind this book. And I'm very, very excited to be joined by really a brother from a different mother. You guys have no idea how much we have in common. Like we played the exact same edition of Dungeons and Dragons. We are weirdly the same. We drink the same kind of like of bourbon and rye. Um, just an amazing guy, and I'm really welcome to be really happy to be added to have here, Matt. Matt, wonderful to have you here at Esoterica, and I'm really excited for you to walk us through the process by which you restored this. What, to my mind, is a real treasure of Western esotericism, and just really excited to have you on the channel, and really excited just to we got to hang out in Boston a little bit, had a couple of drinks. It was
We
fantastic.
did.
It was great. Matt, welcome to the channel.
Thank you for having me. Microphone's okay?
Yep, everything sounds great, man. Everything
Good.
sounds great.
Indeed, it does seem like we have an unearthly number of common interests and common past in that regard. Um, and James Gray is a good friend and client of ours who deals in some very important
Mhm.
and very widely ranged early books, incanabula books before 1500, books very shortly after 1500.
Mhm.
In your case, the book from 1505. Um, and I work for the Green Dragon Bindery in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts. And I have worked there for more than 30 years. And we are also stewards of books. And interestingly, I apprenticed there, I started apprenticing there 30 years ago. But my training is as an archaeologist and an anthropologist, and that's my degree. And so for me, the archaeology of the book is part
Mm.
of what I find compelling, interesting, fascinating, and preserving the archaeology of the book. I sent you back the original covers, even though they were not suitable to um, the age and quality of the book and rarity of the book, but also in your case, which I think is a rather exceptional and interesting case, based on the potential use of the book. There are a lot of books that you can leave in their, some aspect of their binding or wrappers, which may or may not be appropriate to the original issuance of the book. That happens a lot, by the way. We'll get to that in a second. But you're going to use the book. You're going to handle the book. You're going to refer to the book. You're going to have the book on the shelf. And that is often not the case with rare books. Rare books spend a fair amount of time just sort of on the shelf and become objects of sort of um, prestige. But yours is an important early reference book, and I knew from the get go that you were going to be referring to it, handling it, using it, sharing it, um, and therefore it really deserved a real binding and a binding that was appropriate to the age of the book as it was and when the book was first issued. Um, a great many books spend a very some part of their early life in very little binding, no binding, a wrapper of some kind, as sheets, quick sewn together, uncut, deckled edges, and sometimes they come down to us with the large edges and everything, and they'll have been annotated. And if you were using the book as a reference source in 1505, and it's a modest sized book, it's small, you would want it uncut. You would want to have the ability to lay it very flat on the table and to make your annotations in it and to refer back and do your little manuscript notes and whatnot, because that, just like a good notebook today, that's the easiest way to do it. And I've seen copies of herbalist books by Leonard Fuchs or by Galen or others. I've seen Avicenna. I've seen a lot of books of the period from the late 1400s to the early 1500s, where before they were fully bound, before they were put into vellum or pigskin or calfskin or other, they were used actively. Um, and sadly, sometimes when they bound them, the binder at the time was not as safe as they could be with it, and they would trim them to put them in the binding correctly, and they would trim off some of those annotations, and we've seen that many times,
Mm.
or they'd come right up to the edge of the annotations. And early books often have a shocking amount of annotations in them. Yours does not have a ton. I don't believe there's anything other than a mark or two in your copy of this work. But it was in a paper wrapper. That paper wrapper is what I call sort of a waste paper, and that's not really accurate. What that is it's a blue paper, and it was often used. Yep, there it is. It was often used to print broadsides on. It was used to make wrappers for books. It was used to line things. It's basically when they were making paper, as they got down through the layers of the pulp and the paper, they got further and further away from the color control, and they stopped adding things to make the paper white or cream colored, and you get this sort of remnant of waste at the bottom of the pulp, and you get this blue wrapper paper,
Hmm.
which was used extensively for a lot of different things. Now, this wrapper in this particular case dates from the early 1800s, possibly as late as 1830.
Oh.
Okay. So someone took this book, um, and it had been bound before, and they put it in a wrapper. And if we go to the second and third picture, you can see. Can you advance the pictures, or can
Yeah,
I?
just one question before we advance the pictures. What kind of considerations would you have in terms of when someone should rebind a book? I made the decision to have this book rebound from a conservationist point of view. Often, we should again, like I think no change is best change, but I hope that I made a good decision in this case. But when do you think it is the case that rebinding an antiquarian volume is a good idea?
There's um, there's a lot of strata to that.
Hmm.
So in the rare book world, any book that is in pristine condition within its milieu, within its, whether that's a 20th century piece of fiction or whether that is a very early work of science exploration, philosophy, whatever it is. Um, if it's in pristine condition, you don't want to change the binding and put on, a crushed blue Morocco binding because you love crushed blue Morocco and you want to put your seal on the front of it. And in the modern sense of conservation and restoration and collection of books, that's not desirable. There was a time where many collectors or noblemen or even institutions, that up to the turn of the century, up till 1900, did that. We did a tremendous amount of work for Brown University over the years, and they had a whole series of works done for the John Carter Brown Library that, they worked on them. They overworked them. They washed them and they flattened them and they bound them and they gilt them and they put them on in these very micro thin French Morocco boards, and they were beautiful, but they are wholly inappropriate.
Mm,
One of the books that I worked on, which you mentioned in one of your videos, was Woodall Surgeon's Mate.
mm,
Seen that done exactly that way. And we handled that book for an edition, a company called Griffin Editions, which I don't believe exists wholly anymore. But what Griffin used to do was they would um, procure permission to take apart a book that they wanted to reproduce. And they would take the book and they would send it to us, and we would take it apart with an eye towards reproduction, towards camera work. And that gave us a chance to take it completely apart, repair it, lay it flat, and send them the sheets. Right. And I did that with your book. I took it apart.
mhm,
We'll get to that too. But then they could flat scan it and they could correct it and then they could reproduce it and all of the folding plates and everything. And then they would send it back to us after reproduction was done, and we would finish the restoration and put it into a age appropriate binding for the issuance of the book. Okay. But the truth of the matter is the vast majority of books from this time frame or even after this time frame are not in their original bindings. If they are, they're in a terrible state of repair, and they're not really safe to handle and to use. And if there is no established provenance to the binding, so like maybe your book could have had leather boards on it and they were from the early 1500s, we would have looked at that and said, okay, what can we save? Can we save the boards? Can we strengthen the corners? Can we put a new spine on it? Can we save the end papers, which may or may not have annotations or provenance inside? The chain of ownership might be in there, and that's a very important thing, and we would always save that. At the very least, we would always record that. In your case, this book had none of that. It just had a wrapper and it had a little postal sticker label on the spine, which was just a number with no frame of reference. My recollection is the auction record did not show any frame of reference for ownership prior to your receiving it. Um, it was hundreds of years newer than the issuance of the book. And the pages, although intact as a unit, were out of alignment. And there were suggestions that it had spent the early parts of its life in an actual binding, a real binding, a hard binding. Um, and when I looked at it, and I decided that given your stewardship, that maybe it should be carefully taken apart, washed, and then resewn and realigned, it only further strengthened my belief that the book had once been part of what is known as a Samel band.
Mm.
Samel bands, of course, are collections. It's a weird word in the modern age, but is when multiple titles of a similar sort of size were collected up by an owner, a scholar, a priest, a teacher, whoever, a collector, and they were of a similar size and a similar subject matter. And this happened a lot in the early 1500s as books were starting to be increasingly produced. They would sew everything together, and there would be five or six small works inside one binding. So this work was this big, and the binding may have been this big, thick, this thick. And they sewed it all together, and then they put pigskin covers with tooling and maybe even clasps on it or whatever. And when they often did that in the very earliest part of the 1500s and the very latest part of the 1400s, they would sometimes use dyes and paints to speckle the edges of the paper after they trimmed the book to put it into the binding. No one ever did that for a wrapper. When your book came to me, it was in a wrapper. So I saw that it had been part of probably a larger binding at some
Mm.
time. And it had been sectioned out and put into a wrapper. And they resewed it at that time, but they resewed it inaccurately. There was bad alignment, and bad alignment always leads when a book is being handled regularly. Its potential for damage goes up. Um, even if you're careful. So all indications pointed towards your usage, the book, its age, its history, pointed towards the best decision was a binding that was appropriate to 1505. There were a couple of more expensive options. It could have had, full, like, blood red pigskin with, blind tooling and gold clasps. But, now you're getting into very,
Right.
very serious work.
Right.
Um,
And it was important to me also. I think that I communicated to you that having something period appropriate was far more important to me than some kind of luxurious
right,
prestige binding that that it should live in a home that it would feel comfortable in
right.
when it rolled off the press in 1505. So that was more of my concern aesthetically, was that it would live in a binding that it would have felt homey in, I suppose.
Right. And I agree. And I enjoyed doing it, and I like the binding. So this is, we can see the wrapper.
Mhm.
And if we go forward with a couple of pictures, we see, your title page, although title pages at this time were a little different than we've come to expect now. Some of the information was late, it was at the very end of the book as well,
Right.
which we now expect to be on the title page. Um, so these are a couple of reference photos, and then if you keep going through the photos, you will see that.
Yep, and if
Um,
folks just want to notice here, right, this is the Pymander. This is Lodovico Lazzarelli's edition of the Corpus Hermeticum, which is the first printing of all 17 logoi of the Corpus Hermeticum with the Asclepius, but also importantly, it contains the Crater Hermetis, which is Lazzarelli's own um, uh, his own poem or his own text, and that's the text that actually, for the first time, says Lazzarelli says, "I am a Hermeticist." It's the first time that anyone in the literature actually refers to themselves as a Hermeticist. I am Hermeticus sum et Christianus. I'm a Hermeticist and also a Christian. So in some ways, this text is interesting because it's the first time that we have the term Hermeticist actually used as a title that you can call yourself a Hermeticist.
Um, so now you can see there's a steamer next to it. Because I wanted to make sure I preserved everything, I steamed off the end papers, which were actually quite old paper, um, and wanted to see the inside of the wrappers, see if there was anything there. So you're seeing some remnant of that. And then if you keep going, then eventually I exposed the cordage, which it had been sewn on. That's on the outside. I teased them out with a tiny probe
Mhm.
now that it was dampened, and I was able to do that because it was dry. It was in there with like an animal glue. Yep. And I gently teased those out because initially I didn't think I was going to have to resew it, and the more I looked at it, and I thought I was going to be able to realign it. Well, the cords were damp, and maybe I dampened the original glue, but it didn't give enough. So when I reached out to you, and we made the decision to not only take it out of the case, but to wash it apart. And this is a thing that a lot of people who are not intimate with the rare book world, especially early books, which do very well this way, paper was born in water.
Right.
And you can wash paper. The trick is, see, there it is. The trick is drying it carefully. And we have some products that we use, a particular type of filter paper, which you lay the sheets down on, and there's a photo of that. And so now here we can see that there's some misalignment in the pages, right? That there's a section at the bottom of the book or the back of the book jutting out, and you get more of that with another shot up the side or the top of the book. Um, you see, that's far from ideal for a book this good, this
Right.
important. And later on, we'll see how interesting the actual edges are. You'll be able to see the freckling that was done, probably with some sort of piece of. You can see it a little there, but with a piece of sea sponge or something like that at the time. Now, the next thing I discovered, there was my picture with my hand there, was that the pagination was outrageously bad.
Yeah. This is normal for books at this time.
It is outrageously bad.
Yeah.
It is.
Pagination is a joke in books in antiquarian books.
So we have 20, 22, and then we have like 22 again, and then we have
Yeah.
34, and yeah, it's crazy. And there was more than 2 dozen pages that were misnumbered. The good news is, even though printers and binders were maybe not as literate as a lot of people think they were, or as familiar with the use of Arabic numerals, they were pretty good with Roman numerals,
Hmm.
and they were pretty good with the alphabet. And so books like this have what are known as signature marks down at the bottom in the corner. And in a gather or fold of a couple of pages, which are then stitched to the next couple of pages, you will see signature marks. And they usually are alphabetical and sometimes numerical additionally, but they're rarely, if ever, wrong,
Right.
even if the
Yeah.
pagination is terrible.
Yeah. Signature marks are
So,
almost always which I trust. I never trust
right,
when I'm as a book dealer. I'm never trusting pagination. I'm always trusting the signature marks are the far better.
right.
Uh,
So when working with private customers, we'll make very careful notation of pagination. Book dealers like our friend James Gray, he's more aware of it because he always collates a book very carefully when he
yeah.
purchases a book. Wants to make sure that it's complete, make sure that any of the conjugate pages have not, nothing's been lost and whatnot.
Yeah.
And every evidence was that the book was absolutely complete, but it had outrageously bad
Yeah.
pagination. And I
And
thought it was
I
fun.
will say that
This is 3 pages in exactly in sequence, which is my
Yeah.
hand holding them open.
No, it's funny, like, and I will say also, James, when I'm still learning the book trade, that when I want to learn how to do good collation and good cataloging, James Gray is my hero.
Yeah,
He really is.
yeah.
His cataloging is incredible. The
And part of what makes it incredible is he genuinely loves this stuff.
Yeah, oh yeah,
He
yeah,
loves the little weirdnesses. He loves the fact that it was mispaginated.
yep,
He loves the fact that even sometimes copies are missewn. He loves the fact that there's provenance, or that this book was known to have, first been seen here or there, or was connected to this work or that work. And he takes elements, he takes books out of the past that really in the modern era have lost a lot of their sort of place in the world. And he like an archaeologist himself,
right.
he reorients them so that we can be excited about them again. And
Totally agree.
um, this is one of those books.
No, I had James on the channel, and I love I love hanging out with him. He's one of the first people that I really connected with in in the rare book trade, and I really consider myself a student of what he does. And so yeah, also when I wanted to get this book rebound, that's who I went to. I was like, hey James, who do you trust? And he pointed me to you guys, and again, it was a wise choice to
So
to connect with you guys.
yeah, so if we keep going, we can see some other aspects of. So there it is in the tank of water,
Yep,
and immediately you can see some of the tannins, some of the acids and tannins, and a little bit of the grime coming out into the water. A small amount of a deacidification was added to the water in a couple of the stages to help draw that out, and then you'll see that it gets laid onto blotters
yep.
further along
And
in the
just so
water.
folks know, right? This is this book, right? Where this book went
That is
into water.
exactly the title page of this
Yeah,
book.
the title page. Like again, like this is the process of restoration. We're trying to those tannins are acidic. Like acid destroys paper. Like we're trying to this is in no way destroying the book. We're actually trying to do the task of preserving the book so that this book is printed in 1505. I'm trying to preserve it so that in 2505 it's still this good looking.
It will
That's
be.
the idea. That's
Certainly, the paper may actually outlast the leather, although the leather we use is very good vegetable
yeah,
tanned conservation grade leather. Um, Old paper from the late 14, early 1500s, made throughout Europe, was excellent quality. It has a lot of linen fiber and stuff in it. It has very little wood pulp in it. But that being said, some of the acids in the paper came from the environment. They
yeah,
came from people's wood stoves and their breath, and later on in the industrial age, all of the things from coal heating and oils and all the things. London was once buried in soot,
yeah.
and
It's
anything that
smoking.
existed in that time suffered from that.
Yep,
So
yep.
we rinsed some of that suffering out of this book.
Yeah, again, like I mean, again, folks. What I'm trying to say here is like I know this looks like dangerous, but like what I'm really for me, what matters is that this book matters to me deeply, and I want to make sure that if I'm restoring it, this was an added cost to me. But what matters to me was that no, the book survives. The book will survive for another 500 years. And when I'm ashes in the earth, this book will continue to survive and thrive and be able to provide its wisdom to generations long after I am done. I am simply a way station in the history of this incredibly important book of Lodovico Lazzarelli.
Right. So, all right. So if we go forward, all right. So this is going to be a little hard to see, but in between the two pages, left and right, you will see a vague outline of a star. This is the watermark for this paper, and we'll come back to that. But that's the watermark. It's technically the way that this book is folded is actually against the grain. The chain lines go across the page rather than up and down the page, and that star is perfectly caught between two of the chain lines for the original handmade paper.
Mhm.
Um, and mostly they're unique. There's some overlap in the use of symbols and stuff in the period of time that this paper was made, but it can be a clue as to the provenance of the book, the printer, in addition to the information that is actually provided or printed in the book. But it's always sort of interesting to see as part of the chain of its life, like referencing. So the book is in the water and the pages are being claimed, and you'll see in the next page or two or next photo or two, you'll see them on the blotters once I pulled them out. So these blotters are used to dry them safely, and they stack on top of each other, and then we put a weight on them, and we lay them out in an order, which helps us recollate them easily. Um, they get a sizing agent to help bolster the paper. These were sized with methyl cellulose sizing. Um, and then they get completely dried. And before they're like maybe 100% dry, maybe there's 5% moisture in them or something like that, we gently fold them and we collate them because it's a little easier on the paper to fold them when they have just a skosh, just a little bit of dampness. Um, and then we prepare it for selling. And we have some pictures of getting that ready. So, also middle repair. So there's the very middle of this signature fold was torn enough that it justified having tissue. So that's a piece of damp tissue that was just adhered to that. It's a Japanese long fiber conservation tissue. We use it a lot. It's excellent. We use only as much as we need.
Mhm.
Um, this book also had one real, what they in the book trade is called lacuna, where there was a tear and
Right.
a piece was missing from the edge of one of the pages, and it was a pretty big piece.
Right.
Thankfully, not in the text, but up relatively close to it.
Yeah.
And we matched that with a combination of tissue and paper and infilled that. That picture is a little further along in the set.
And folks should also know, like, this book is printed in 1505. This is a time period where people were still expecting um, illuminated initials. And
Correct.
so you see this little D right here. That's because you could pay someone to come in and put in a very fancy illuminated D, or a colored D or a versal D or whatever.
Right.
Because at this point in printing, 1505, we're still in the time period where manuscripts are, in some sense, still or printed books are still copying manuscripts. And so it's not uncommon at this time period for have people come back in and put you in really fancy colored D's and
Yeah.
other illuminated. So that's why there's a floating D here. It's to inform a would-be illuminator or would-be colorist, a
Right.
rubricator, to come back in and put in that. That does not happen in this edition.
No,
But
and the D could have been also completely different than the typeface used
yep,
for the book. So, while this has a fairly Latin style typeface, which is relatively comfortable for a modern reader, an illuminator or rubricator may have used an elaborate, you know, black letter Germanic D
mhm,
or a unsealed D or something like that, because that was more meaningful to them or more artistic or interesting to them. We see a lot of books where there's a blend of the two.
right,
Sometimes they line up, sometimes they're similar, but um, yeah, the manuscript for this might have been very different.
yep. Yeah, and so like again, like it's just again, it's just an interesting thing where you think of printing as the Great Revolution, but in many ways, printing is aping manuscripts, even up to 1505.
Yeah.
Well, this is 55, 60 years.
Really until 1530 or
Yep.
1540 you see this effect where they still left some part of it for potential embellishment.
Yep. Yep. And so this is why this kind of volume 1505 is not, it's not technically an incunable, but often get referred to as post incunables because they still have all, incunable and non-incunable. That's a book dealer convention. The person printing this had no conception of that,
Right.
but the I think what really makes the incunable quasi incunable line is that the printer of this is still thinking in some level about manuscripts in a
Right.
way that 25, 30 years later, they're not.
Yeah. It started to
The
fade.
Yeah, the cat's out of the bag. They're not
Yep.
they're not playing second fiddle to the rubricators and the illuminators.
Absolutely true. So there we see the lacuna and a carefully shaped patch. Um, it's my little stylus that I've had since high school. It was originally a drafting pencil.
Nice.
It's now got a needle in it, but that was used to help shape the piece, and then fit it. Um, and you can see, um, I think, yep, there it is, tucked in there. Um, you can at times make a more perfect match with what is known as a leaf caster. Um, it's a pretty serious piece of equipment, and it often leads to a kind of a thick and unflexible patch, even if it looks visually more perfect. Wasn't really called for here, but I was happy with the patch, and once it's in the book, it looks excellent. Yep.
Yep. Yep.
So,
And again, also I think it's important to, even if there is a visual difference in the patch and the original, I think it's important from a conservation point of view, just so that it for me, it's not about um restoring something in some kind of illusory way, the way that really was. No, it's like this is a repair. The repair should be obvious from a conservationist point of view, and to me that's a value add. It's
right,
not
and
about
very, very reversible, which it is.
exactly, yeah, the Japanese, like that Japanese kind of of texture is reversible, that we're not trying to repair the book, we're trying to conserve the book, and that kind of damage can further damage it by catching on a,
Yep.
you know whatever, uh, a finger turning the book can rip it further. And
Yep.
so we're not trying to repair it, we're trying to conserve it.
Right.
And anything we do to conserve it allows, again, it's about preserving it for future generations in a way that's immediately reversible, if needs be.
Right. We have, it's a weird thing to say, but we have a Hippocratic oath as regards to books,
Mm,
which is we do no harm.
right,
Um, we don't want to change the nature of the book.
right.
It can always be taken back apart.
Yep. And I think that's, again, for me, as like a person who, this, me again, this is a book I own, but also, again, I don't think of myself as an owner. It really, to me, is about shepherding, like
Mm.
stewardship,
Yep.
and that, that those kinds of concerns really matter to me. That even if we make a repair, the repair is conservation minded.
Yep. So, yep. So this is some of yeah, there it is with some of the other pages, and um, we I think fairly shortly after this, you can see the collated stack. No, that's a close up of the repair.
Yeah, good. Right next to Hermes.
Yep. Yep. All right. So that's a sewing frame. We made that many years ago. There are older, fancier sewing frames, but this works. We have a couple different sizes of these, and scissors, waxed linen thread, needle, some weights just to hold things in place. Um, when books were first sewn the first time before they were trimmed on a plow shear, they were, yeah, there was some level of control of the alignment, but they were less worried about it. They sewed it quickly and around the cords, and then they could trim it. I have to keep it in its existing trim, left or right, and sew it. In this case, it was sewn on double cords, and it was sewn out with a minimum amount of what is called pack sewing. Um, and the spacing. the original spacing for potential cordage, there was a hint that maybe it originally had 4 cords. When
Mm,
it was sewn and put into the wrapper, there was a different set of cords on it. They were just I think it was 3. But maybe it was 4, but they were not in a usual position. So I corrected that and hand sewed it in the late medieval, early Renaissance style on double cords, so that I could lace the cords into the boards and do a correct binding for it.
mm,
And I think the last picture of me sewing it is actually, you can see the actual title page of the book, um, in the photograph. So there's a couple of the gathers. Those are the signatures. So each one of those groups of pages that I'm stitching, one connected to the next, is a signature or gather or choir. Something that's called a choir of pages which have been marked, and I am connecting those across those cords, going in and out like a weaver, to the next level with a catch stitch. And then eventually the book is done, and that will include the end papers, which it did in this case. I preserved the original. Yeah, there's your title page and me running the needle for the last gather of pages.
yeah.
Um,
And again, folks should realize, like, this is, when Matt's talking about this, this is the most, talking about craftsmanship. I mean, this is hands on. Every single page, every single gather, every single stitch is done by hand.
yeah,
Um,
that's 2 hours right there.
yep,
Just getting that aligned and sewn correctly was a minimum of 2 hours of labor.
yep. And so
Careful.
this is why I think people need to understand that, um, for me, and for I think for many other book dealers and booksellers who care, really care, and other collectors, uh, we're not messing around. Like, we really trust people like Matt to to do the amazing work that they do, because for us, the love of these books is not just the love of the contents, it's a love of the longevity. We want these books to have lives that live well beyond us. And I'll say that investing the money I invested in having this book rebound, um, is very important to me, because it means that it will survive me. That's what matters to me. It's not about whether it increases its value or not to me. I think that it does. I'm not going to lie. Yeah, of course, it increases its value to some degree. But what matters to me more than anything else is this book, this copy of Crater Hermetis, which is an incredibly rare book, ultimately will now survive, because people like Matt, who have extraordinarily good craftsmanship and skill sets, can ensure this book will survive another 500 years, because it would not have survived another 500 years, maybe, in something like this. It just wouldn't have.
No, probably not. Um, I've been the bindery, the Green Dragon bindery, has
Yep.
been in business. It's just had its 60th year, and it was started by a man named C. Allen Carpenter, who was affectionately known as Skip Carpenter, and he learned these skills as a furniture restorer who pivoted into book restoration, in the 60s. And he had the great and good fortune of meeting and training with one of the greatest English bookbinders in history, or in modern history, who only recently passed away, a man named Bernard Middleton.
Mm,
Bernard Middleton came to the United States and taught for a while, and met with people and was trying to build the craft back up. And he wrote a couple of very good books, which even to this day I refer to and find virtually no fault with. And if I were to find fault with, it's only because something new has been invented that had not been available when he wrote the book.
mm,
It is the foundational work of the craft and of bookbinding, and the restoration of leather book bindings and the recreation of leather book bindings. The books are excellent, and Bernard Middleton was a huge asset to antiquarian bookbinding and conservation. And we were very lucky. And my skills came through from Skip and his nephew Wes Carpenter. and I share the business. I am not the owner. His Skip's daughter now owns it. Christine owns it, and we're part of that long-standing tradition. And there's, even though we've got 60 years under our, you know, resume, there's 100 years of experience in the building.
Hmm.
We all have different strengths, and we overlap, and we collaborate, and we don't have an ego about this. We do what's best for the book. We do what's best for the client, for the institution. You know we take all the things into consideration: the historical importance of the work, the budget, and we are not ashamed or afraid to say, no, you should leave this alone, or we don't know. There's somebody better at this one thing than we are. Maybe you should talk to them.
Hmm.
Um,
No,
so,
the thing I really appreciated, Matt, about like this whole process of getting this book rebound was that every step of the process we were in contact.
yep, yep,
Every like, do you want this? Do you want this? This is how much it'll cost. Like, I think you should do it. It's going to cost this much, but like, and like, the uh, um, when we talked about like soaking the book and like, getting the book back into the water, that was an expensive process.
it was.
It was like I signed up for one price, and you wrote to me and was like, we need to do this, and I was like, yeah, that's going to basically double the price of this whole project, but also it's going to make this book last, for hundreds of years. You
It's not
know,
just the lasting though. It's also the mechanical aspect, the
right?
architecture of
Yep.
creating the book and the sewing, how it interfaces with
Yep.
the structure of the book, the boards, how everything builds on that foundational layer. And by washing it and resewing it, not only did I take tannins and do good work conservation wise with the paper, it gave me the opportunity to make a really beautiful and robust and correct binding that
Right.
functions well.
Right.
It opens well.
Right.
It stands up on the shelf. It does all of those things well.
No, that's right. And it is something like I will say again, like, folks, I can't really describe to you what it's like to like pick this book up, and just like thumb through it. This is a foundational work of Western esotericism. Cornelius Agrippa, like when he's writing his three books of occult philosophy, this is the book in his hands. And this book was printed relatively meagerly. I mean, who knows how many copies were out there? But to be able to like hold this book in the hands, flip through it, lay it down like flat, like, and put book clips on it, be able to work with it. It would have been impossible without this kind of restoration work.
Yep.
And knowing that this book now will endure for hundreds of years after I'm dead,
Yep.
God willing,
Indeed.
is incredibly important to me.
So once it was, we got the last part of the sewing was to sew the front end paper in, and now you can see the cordage, the double cords, and then that's just in a backing press, and then in a weird
Who
act
knows?
of fate, while I was working on your copy of the Pymander, another copy of the Pymander showed up from what, 16
It's 1650. This is the first translation of the Corpus Hermeticum into English.
yep,
Um, a quite rare edition, I will say, in 17 books, which is interesting, right? Because this edition of the Corpus Hermeticum is actually being translated from Lazzarelli's edition. Because folks may know the Ficino edition lacked the totality of the logoi, and also was very defective. And the English translation that we are seeing here, was actually done from the Lazzarelli edition. So it is hilarious. Some might say syncretistic that it showed up on your bench.
providential.
Yep. It was a hermetic meeting of
Yeah,
minds.
yeah. And it's not the first time this has happened in my life. Like I've seen all kinds of things. I don't. There's this undertow in the book world I don't completely understand, but here we are. Yeah.
Yep.
This one was bound in a little calfskin, speckled calfskin binding, It was, other than a cracked front joint, was intact. Um, the client who owned this requested that we restore the existing binding, even though it was inappropriate for the book. It was solid. It was still sewn well. The pages were relatively even. Everything was okay. It was bound sometime probably in the 1840s, maybe as late as 1850. It had very tiny typescript. The whole thing, the whole title was on this little tiny postage
Yep.
stamp spine of label. But anyway, so yeah, the other copy, who knew?
Yep.
So
You never know when Hermetic Wisdom against us will cross your bench.
yeah. So there's it with the acid-free book boards, and you can see some of the tools that I was using to tease the new cordage through to lace it into the binding. And then after this, I sewed linen headbands, two color linen headbands. That's the inside. You can see the cords pulled through. It's a little tricky to do. Um, One of the things that I have never completely figured out is how they did this. I think they had some sort of special needle, which has been lost to time, for pulling these through, and they left them much longer. Um, and the other thing is that modern bookbinding board, this is called Davy board, this gray board that has the F on it. Um, that's for front. The is that it's very hard. It's very dense. It's good. It's good quality. It does a lot of good things, but it's very dense, so it's hard to lace through it. Older book board was layers of paper, uh, kind of, welded together with animal glue, and it's much easier to drive the needle through with the cordage and whatnot.
Hmm.
So we see that. So it was put together, and then there's the beginning of a headband, and now you can see the two or maybe even three color speckling now on the edge of the paper. It was sort of a green, which had oxidized to sort of a brownish color, which is common, and sort of a cinnabar color, some sort of red color. And occasionally we also see brown, because we'll see a brown and another brown, which means there was brown and green because of the verdigris in the green turning it. Um, but this would not have been done with the book in a wrapper. This would have only been done with the book in a binding. That's very particular. So that was the beginning, and you can see at the foot and the head, there's the bands and the headbands. Um, I did a two color, a rustic, rusty color, and they help reinforce and stabilize the book and prevent damage to the head and tail cap when it's being handled. Helps to unify the entire um, sewing and structure of the text block. And that is sitting on the piece of undyed calfskin. I selected a piece of English calfskin for this, not different than German calfskin, but very similar. It's a good quality vegetable tan calfskin, which I dyed with natural dyes in preparation for the binding. And you'll see that now. There it is, dyed, and it, with the expectation that it would darken and warm up a little bit once it was oiled and prepared or waxed. Um, and I paired the edges. You can see that the edges are little sort of rough at the edges. What that is I had used a special knife, a skiving knife, to thin the edges so that the edges of the leather naturally turn around the boards and do not thicken and look and feel normal, which was always done at the time and still done. Um, and there it is on the inside. You can see the sort of lighter area in the middle is where the knife had not touched. I thinned the edges and part of the spine area to accept the bands so that I could accentuate the bands when it was done. And that's me pasting off the backside of the leather and wearing one of my martial arts t-shirts. You and I have talked about that a little bit. A friend of mine designed that with a sword guard. So yeah, and stretching the leather a little at the spine area to give it a little room, a little sort of gusseting to go over the bands. And the book is held upright in the backing press, securely in position so that I can pull that down. Some people use a laying up press, which is a wooden press that sits on their bench. We have several of these large iron jobbers or backers press, which work great. You can see a little dampness in the leather from the paste. It's a wheat paste, which is a conservation grade paste, which is used. And I laid it down. And then the next picture shows me sort of gently tucking it along the spine and down onto the body of the boards. And that's just before pulling it out of the binding or pulling it out of the press. And once I do that, I would start turning it over the edges. And I trim the corners and tuck the corners. And all of this is very, very traditional. This has been done this way for hundreds of years.
Right.
It When it's done right with the right proportions and the right thicknesses and the right materials, it works very well.
Right. This is also the thing that was very important to me was that it was done with the most traditional style possible to the period. And that's why I'm really glad, again, when I can hold this volume in my hands, to know that this is, it's sitting in a home that would have been very, very much traditional to to the early 16th century.
Yeah. So I think the next picture may be, yep. So now you can see it. It's in the press over the bands. The bands have not been accentuated. And this is just a jig we made for this press so I could tie it up so that I can run a cord back and forth, which was traditional, to pull down the bands. And the next picture will show that in this sort of, pied zigzag. There you go.
Hmm.
That's just to accentuate and pull down the spine, which was absolutely what they did in the past. There was a variety of ways that they did it, and maybe they didn't do it in a press. Maybe they wrapped it in cardboard, except leaving the exposed spine and then wrapped it, or they had special cut boards with little lips on them. There was a lot of different things that were done, but this was what we use. It's easy. And here I am beginning the blind
The
tooling.
tooling.
Right. So that tool is very hot. If I had touched it to a damp cloth, it would have sizzled. Um, and I laid it out. I had made a plan on a piece of paper, the basic dimensions and proportions of the board, and made a sort of a map for where I was going to place things based on the most common types of tooling for this era, um, and and balanced against what we can do and what I have for tools. Because in the 1500s, the manufacture and making of shaped tools, specific dies and rolls and all of these things, hand stamps, that was a much more affordable and accessible process than it is now.
Mm.
Making new dies and new tools is very expensive and is undertaken with how much use are we going to get out of this. And so when we select a plan to do a new binding, we try to balance out, like, okay, what's going to look best with what we have? Can we add a tool? Would one new tool really make a difference for this? Does it really want to have a little oak leaf or a acorn or a dragon or something like that? We sometimes will do that, and we'll talk with the client. In this case, the feature of this was tiny sunbursts, and the fact that the title was inset on the front cover and the date was inset on the front cover, which was done in the early 1500s.
Right.
um,
And this is a very folks may realize this is a very slender volume. There's not much
right.
heft here, so there's no sense in like putting Crater Hermetis or Ludovico Lazzarelli here on the spine. And I do love the sunbursts. I really love so much of this book is about illumination, and the sunbursts I think really do that well. And folks may not be able to see it, but you can see on the front here it says Crater Hermetis, and then the date. So it maintains. Also, I'll say it maintains that very like, um, what's the right way of putting it? Um, Almost stoic
Yep.
kind of quality
Yep.
of those early, toolings, where it's very like, there's a kind of, uh, we get so used to 18th century bindings where it's all gold and leaf
Oh yeah.
and all these floral touches, and or even the century later with the pigskin binding with like, all these like images of life of Christ and all this stuff. And I do love the fact that like these more old bindings are just like much more regal, at least in my opinion. Hey, kitty.
Sorry
Um,
for the cat.
there's just something. There's something very like Spartan about them that I think gives
Yeah.
them like a very like regal kind of character.
Yeah, so and it's pretty accurate to that. One of the things that a lot of books from this time, especially if they're a little thicker, they didn't always label any part of it. They labeled the edge of the paper.
Right.
They didn't own a lot of books, so sometimes
Right.
they would get the book bound and they would take a quill and they would label, Crater Hermetis on, or Crater Hermeticum, whatever they would choose, or Pymander or Lazzarelli,
Right.
just on the edge
On
of the
this side,
paper,
on this
weirdly,
side, yeah, books when
right,
people,
right on the bottom, or
yeah,
right on the foredge of the curve of the foredge,
yep,
and they would put it on the shelf, and they would look up, and the book spine would be in, not out,
yep, yeah. People
and they
forget
would be like, "Oh, I got."
books went this way or this way. Like
Right, "I need my
people forget.
Lazzarelli," and they would pull the
Yep,
Lazzarelli down,
yep,
right? So a lot of labels for books from the earliest period are actually added later on.
yep,
Um, but when they did, either they would sometimes put them on the cover, which is what I did here, and it could be a label, it could be a date, it could be provenance, it could be location. There's a couple of different things that you see in these little sort of frameworks on the front tooling, which indicate, where the book is, or where it's from, or who the book is from or written by. And that's what we chose in this case, which is a title and a date.
yep, yeah. And again, I think folks have to know like there's no standardization at this time. This is a
No,
ship
there's
being built at
trend.
sea.
There's just trends, and we
Yep,
try to look at the trends. And I have a book, and when I get new, if I get anything in, if James or one of our other clients brings me a book with an original binding that is interesting and is something I feel I can replicate or come close to replicating, I record that.
yeah,
And I create this chart in my mind as an archaeologist. I'm like, what's the most likely thing for this book to have had at this time?
yep. No, and that's why again I'm so glad to work with you guys because I feel like again this book gets to, again, like I said, like it gets to live in a home
Yeah,
that I think that it would have been comfortable with.
right. So we finished up so this is the inside, the cordage spread out, and the linen hinge material that I did to. Then sometimes that was vellum, but I use linen. The reason I use the linen is it's very thin and very soft, and this is a slender volume.
Hmm.
And that additional attachment gave it some additional strength and balanced out the space between the bands a little bit, but also it allowed it to open more softly. If I had used vellum strips or parchment strips in between, that would have been for a bigger book,
Mm,
something a little chunkier,
right.
and that would have given it extra structure and stiffness, but it wasn't necessary. So I did this thin linen hinging, and that's for the end paper. There, it's glued down or pasted down, and then I put the end paper down. And these end papers were what were with it. And the truth is that I didn't have anything that was a better match to the feel and weight that was on the book than this.
Mm,
And they were already trimmed to the right size and everything, so I reused them.
nice.
And there was two notes, and these it would be very difficult to figure out if there's any provenance with these little library numbers on here,
Yeah.
but they are provenance.
Yep.
So they were preserved. And there they are. So there it is. Open up, and if I don't know if we can expand on it at all, but I pied the top and bottom panel. You can see the little sunburst. You can see the date. Um, this is absolutely appropriate to the time. And there's it in C2 inside the book with the title page, and it looks very natural.
Yep. That's the most important thing. It's like nothing has been changed. Fundamentally, nothing has been
Right,
changed.
right,
It's just been updated, preserved,
right.
conserved, so that it will last um, for several more centuries. Yeah, here it is, laid
There's the
flat.
floor edge, and you can see the speckling
Yep.
and the blind tooling. And this is blind tooling, meaning there's no gold. It's just done with a hot tool.
Yep.
Um, every once in a while, you see a mixture. I'll see something like this where the sunbursts might have been done with gold, but nothing else, or the date and the name. That's a variation that we sometimes see. Um, Little bit of tooling at the top of the corners. You can see the headband, although it's weirdly a little out of focus. People obsess about headbands, actually. In the bookbinding world, people who do fancy bookbinding or like there's whole
Yeah, people get crazy about that stuff.
volumes about headbands, and
Yeah.
they get very fancy. This was a traditional headband for the time, and you can see the book is only 8 inches, 8.25 inches high.
Yeah. It's a small
Um,
book.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, big like small books make big impacts, folks.
Yep.
Like,
And I think, yep, that's the colophon. That's the
yep,
last page in the book, the very back,
yep, yeah. Printed
which
in April.
right, and where it says Krakow. And so, in combination with my seeing the eight-pointed star, which was what the watermark was, and that it was in Krakow. So there's the watermark. I've turned it sideways, and it's very hard to see, but there's actually a couple of faint lines going up and down in this, which are the chain lines, which are part of the way the paper was made. In between those is this eight-pointed star. So my initial check into a couple of databases on Étoile, the star, was that, well, maybe this was came from France, Champagne. There was a paper maker in the late 1400s, early 1500s that had this star. Um, so did the paper come all the way from Champagne? Or did it come from Brussels? Or like there's a list of places where this paper had been noticed in conjunction with publishing. Um, and these are measurements. So this database actually shows in millimeters how wide the star is, right? Um, and then the next page actually has a list of some of the places. So it has,
Mm,
that it was in Cologne and Brussels and there's some dates associated with it. And Paris is one of the last in 1505. Um, Yet another database indicated that this watermark was also used in the Netherlands by a Utrecht paper company. And if that's the case, that paper traveled 1,000 miles.
wow.
Not 1,000, 1,000 kilometers, and
Yeah.
1,000 kilometers. Some number of I don't know how many miles, but 1,000 kilometers to get from the Netherlands to Krakow. That's a pretty good distance. Um, and it's interesting the life that these things lead. Um, one of the one of the things that we used to work with a client named Owen Gingrich. Owen Gingrich was a astronomer researcher at Harvard who wrote a number of books. One of the books, he was a book collector, and his focus was comets and astronomy, and of course that meant he was interested in Copernicus.
Mm,
Because Copernicus was a huge pivotal moment. His seminal work published at the time of his death in around 1543, the revolution of the spheres or the heavenly spheres, which changed the common understanding, or the accepted, or the church accepted understanding of the universe, going from earth centric to sun centric, heliocentric. um the book was banned. There was repercussions. Was he a heretic, and all of these things, that the legends of these important and derisive and disturbing science and religious books of this time. And Owen wrote a book called The Book That No One Read, and it's about Copernicus's work. And the belief had been that no one really got to see this book, that so many copies were destroyed and whatnot.
mm,
And Owen did this vast research over a lifetime and got his hands on and studied and read and made notations and photographed every copy. He went to Russia. He went to Prague. He went to places that he could have gotten arrested. And he recorded all these copies of this book that no one read.
hmm,
And he made every recorded note that he could about who read it,
right.
whose handwriting is that, whose annotations are that, where did these annotations come from, what library held it before it was in this library. And he started creating these cross references. And he did this for two reasons: because he was interested in the subject matter. And it doesn't matter that it's Copernicus, other than that was an amazing book, but this could be true of any piece of important uh, philosophical work, religious mysticism, Agrippa, copies of all of these works, where you could start to develop this archaeology of, like, who held this book, who owned this book, who read this book. And when I read his book, The Book That Nobody Read, I was blown away because they all read this book. They went from university to university, and students were trading it with each other, and they were talking about it, and they knew the professor, and the professor gave it to other people. And this dangerous book on a heliocentric universe was read by a huge
Right.
number of students and professors. And there was consequences potentially for that for them, and they still read it.
Right.
They still talked about it, and they still met. And I'm in awe of this time where, in the face of scrutiny and judgment and other, that they were trying to learn. They were writing, and they were reading, and they were studying, and they were researching, and they were sharing, and they were getting together, and they were talking about it, and they were referencing each other's work, and sometimes better and sometimes not as good. But the connectivity that some of these books have in time with these scholars and these people that own them is staggering. It's exciting and staggering.
I agree. I agree. That's why this book matters to me. Like, you know, this book had a huge impact
Yeah,
in the field I'm in. It's but the idea that like this little book could have such a huge impact
right. And
when
I'm
it when it when it
honored to
came
have been entrusted with it.
when it came into my possession, it became it was clear to me that like I needed to do something with it. I had to preserve it, and so I was really glad to be able to like take it to you guys and take it to yourself and your craftsmanship, so that God willing, Bezer Hashem, it will survive long after I'm moldering in the earth. Someone will touch this binding and these sunbursts, and they will have some appreciation of the illumination that this little book can provide. And for that, Matt, I want to express my sincere thanks to you and to Green Dragon Boundary. And where can folks find you? Where can folks find you if they want to get books rebound or ask a question about old books? Where can they reach you?
So we're in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, in the United States, and we've always been there. And we do have a web page, of course, greendragonbindery.com. We can be reached at info@greendragonbindery.com. We have a Facebook page, which we try to update once or twice a month with new work, interesting work that we're working on. And sometimes that's mundane, but still loved by the clients. And sometimes that's really outrageous and rustic and crazy stuff that whether it's first editions of books or science works or whatever it is, or custom works. And we do some custom design work,
Mm,
some small edition work, um, and yeah, we've been there and we're here to stay.
very
So
cool. Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me. And
welcome. So happy,
uh,
happy to.
yeah, just like, again, like I think many people don't know that like so much goes into the book arts,
Right.
and I'm glad that you guys are doing the good deed. And thank you so much for restoring this book again. Again, I hold this book in my hands, and I get to run my hands over this amazing cover and open up this copy of Crater Hermetis that I wrote a paper on this book in graduate school, and here I am like holding a copy of it.
I have some stuff in my library. The funny thing is about bookbinders, it's like shoe repair.
Yeah,
Like, the cobbler's kids don't have shoes. I have books in my own collection that need to be bound.
yeah. No, I have no, I have a pound of books for you guys
So
to rebind. I'm not sure when I'll be able to get to it,
yeah.
but
Well, we'd love to help you again.
thank you for the work you do to make sure that these books survive into the next 500 years.
You too, and thank you for raising the awareness of these books and the connectivity and the potential interest that these have in both history and in our lives going forward. And you know, somebody if somebody doesn't, they just sit moldering in a library. And no, there it's fascinating stuff. It's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. All right, folks. Well, I'll put Green Dragon Bindery in the description and the contact information there. And otherwise than that, Matt, thank you, man.
Thank you, Justin.